A humble girl helps a man in the park, not knowing he is a disguised millionaire. The evening sun cast long golden streaks across the quiet city park, illuminating the patches of green where families picnicked and joggers took their evening runs. The scent of fresh grass mixed with the distant aroma of street food wafting from a nearby vendor. Amidst this peaceful setting, a frail-looking man sat hunched on a wooden bench, his ragged coat pulled tight around him as he shivered slightly. His unkempt beard and weary eyes made him appear just like any other homeless man who had fallen through the cracks of society. People walked past him, some stealing a glance of pity, while others ignored him entirely. But one pair of kind eyes noticed his distress. A young girl, no older than 22, paused her hurried steps and studied him closely. Her name was Emma, a kind-hearted soul who had seen her share of struggles but never let life harden her heart. Emma had just finished her shift at a nearby cafe, her simple clothes dusted with the scent of coffee and vanilla. Her worn-out sneakers and the patched-up bag slung over her shoulder were testaments to her modest means. Yet, despite her own hardships, she had always believed in kindness. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Are you all right?" The man looked up, his tired brown eyes filled with surprise. He had expected to be ignored, just as he had been all day. Clearing his throat, he forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, miss," he rasped, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Emma wasn't convinced. His hands were trembling, and she noticed how he subtly tried to rub warmth into them. It was early autumn, and though the evenings were getting colder, most people were dressed comfortably. This man, however, wore only an old coat with torn cuffs. Emma reached into her bag, pulling out a small paper bag. "I bought an extra sandwich for my brother, but I think you need it more." It was a small lie, one meant to preserve the man's dignity. She had actually bought it for herself after a long shift, but she couldn't bear the thought of walking away while he suffered. For a moment, the man hesitated. Pride and gratitude warred within him, but eventually, hunger won. "That's very kind of you," he said, accepting the bag with shaky hands. As he unwrapped the sandwich, Emma noticed something strange. His fingers, though rough and slightly dirted, had the telltale signs of someone who was once well-groomed. She watched as he took a careful bite, chewing slowly as if savoring the taste. "What's your name?" she asked. He swallowed before answering. "Jack," he said simply. "Well, Jack, I'm Emma. And it looks like you could use something warm to drink." She sat beside him and reached into her bag again, pulling out a small thermos. "It's just tea, but it helps." Jack stared at her, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. He had met many people in his lifetime, people who sought to impress, people who only gave when cameras were around, people who judged without a second thought. But this girl, she was different. There was no pity in her gaze, no condescension in her tone, only pure kindness. As he took a sip of the warm tea, a sense of comfort washed over him. It had been years since he had felt such genuine human connection. Emma stayed beside him, chatting about simple things. How the cafe she worked at had an old coffee machine that always leaked, how she was saving up for night classes, how she loved the quietness of the park at sunset. Jack listened, nodding occasionally, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in a long time. Little did Emma know, the man she had just fed wasn't just another homeless man. He was Jackson Hale, a millionaire who had built a business empire from the ground up. But weary of the world's superficiality, he had chosen to step away from his lavish life, disguising himself as a homeless man to understand the true nature of people. And today, he had found someone truly special. As the evening deepened and the streetlights flickered to life, Emma stretched her arms and stood up. "I should get going," she said. "If you ever need anything, I'm usually at the cafe down the street." Jack nodded, still holding on to the thermos she had given him. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his voice holding a sincerity he hadn't felt in years. She waved and walked away, never once asking for anything in return. But Jack sat there long after she had gone, gripping the warm thermos, knowing that his life had just taken a turn he never expected. Jack sat on the park bench long after Emma had disappeared down the winding path, her figure swallowed by the gentle glow of the streetlights. His hands curled around the thermos she had given him, feeling its fading warmth seep into his fingers. He had met thousands of people in his lifetime, business moguls, politicians, influencers, Yet none had ever shown him the kind of pure, unselfish kindness that Emma had tonight. As a self-made millionaire, Jackson Hale had built an empire from scratch. He had once known struggle, sleeping in his car in his early 20s, eating cheap meals just to survive. But the moment his business had taken off, the world around him had changed. People looked at him differently. They measured his worth by the number of digits in his bank account, by the luxury cars he owned, by the exclusive circles he moved in. And yet, in this moment, sitting on a worn-out park bench in ragged clothes, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: seen. Truly seen. Not as a man of wealth, but as a human being. Jack had begun this social experiment months ago, walking the streets as a homeless man, testing the world around him. And though he had encountered kindness in rare moments, he had mostly seen indifference. Until today. Emma. The way she had offered her sandwich without hesitation, the way she had shared tea with a stranger, the way she had sat beside him as if he was just another person, not someone to be avoided or pitied, it unsettled him. It made him question everything. That night, Jack made a decision. He would find a way to know more about Emma. The next morning, Emma woke up early in her tiny apartment. It was a small, one-bedroom space with second-hand furniture and a tiny kitchen that barely had enough counter space, but it was home. After making herself a simple breakfast of toast and tea, she grabbed her bag and left for work. The cafe where she worked, Maple and Bean, was a cozy little place just a few streets away from the park. It wasn't a high-end cafe, but it had a warmth to it that kept regular customers coming back. Emma loved working there, despite the long hours and modest pay. She enjoyed talking to people, hearing their stories, and offering them a brief moment of comfort in their busy lives. As she tied her apron around her waist, she glanced at the clock. Another long shift ahead. What she didn't know was that outside the cafe, sitting on a bench across the street, Jack watched her from a distance. He had changed into a slightly cleaner version of his disguise, still wearing old clothes, but not as ragged. He had spent the night thinking about Emma, about why she was so different from the people he had met. And more than that, he wanted to understand her world. Over the next few days, Jack made it a habit to sit near the cafe, watching as Emma worked tirelessly. He noticed how she greeted every customer with a warm smile, how she always took a moment to ask how they were doing, how she would slip an extra cookie into a child's hand when they looked longingly at the pastry display. She was struggling. He could see it in the way she counted her tips at the end of her shift, the way she rubbed her sore feet after standing for hours. Yet, she never let it dampen her spirit. One evening, as Emma left the cafe, Jack mustered the courage to approach her again. "Emma," he called out. She turned, surprised to see him. "You're here." He offered a small smile. "Yeah. I wanted to thank you again for the tea and sandwich the other night. That meant a lot to me." Emma brushed it off with a wave of her hand. "Oh, that was nothing. I just figured you could use a little warmth." Jack hesitated before asking, "Can I buy you a coffee?" Emma laughed. "Jack, I work in a cafe all day. The last thing I need is more coffee." But seeing the sincerity in his eyes, she softened. "How about a walk instead?" Jack nodded, and they fell into step beside each other. As they strolled through the city streets, Emma talked about her dreams, how she wanted to study, how she wanted to do something more with her life. Jack listened intently, fascinated by her resilience. And with every passing day, he knew one thing for certain. He didn't just want to know more about Emma. He wanted to change her life. But he also knew that if she ever found out who he really was, she might never trust him again. So, for now, he kept his secret. Jack and Emma continued to meet nearly every evening after her shifts at the cafe. Their conversations stretched from simple things, like her favorite childhood memories, to deeper discussions about life, struggle, and dreams. Emma found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She didn't know why, but something about Jack made her feel safe, understood. And Jack? He found himself drawn to Emma in a way he never expected. At first, he had been curious about her kindness, her selflessness. But now, that curiosity had turned into admiration, respect, and something else he wasn't ready to admit. Yet, the longer he kept his secret, the heavier it became. One evening, as they sat on their usual park bench, Emma sighed, rubbing her tired hands together. I sometimes wonder if I'll ever get out of this cycle, she murmured. Working long shifts, barely making rent, saving little by little for school. Some days, I feel like I'm running in place. Jack's heart clenched. He could fix this. He could change everything for her with just a single phone call, a check, a job offer. But he knew Emma. She wasn't the kind of person who took handouts. She was proud, strong, and determined. If he swooped in as Jackson Hale, the millionaire, she would feel betrayed. So he stayed silent. But fate had its own plans. That very night, Emma's manager at the cafe called her into the back office. She returned minutes later, her face pale and hands shaking. Jack saw her and immediately stood. "What happened?" he asked. She let out a shaky breath. "The cafe is shutting down. The owner is selling the place. I just lost my job." Jack felt something snap inside him. He had watched Emma struggle enough. He couldn't let her lose everything. "Emma," he said carefully, what if I told you I could help?" Emma let out a tired laugh. "Jack, you've been struggling just like me. How could you possibly?" "I haven't been honest with you," he cut in. His heart pounded. "I'm not who you think I am." And in that moment, Jack finally told Emma the truth. Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're what?" she whispered. Jack ran a hand through his hair, no longer the scruffy, defeated man she had first met in the park. "I'm Jackson Hale. I own Hale Enterprises. I have more money than I know what to do with. And this entire time, I've been living this way to understand people. To see the world without the filter of wealth." Emma took a step back, her entire body stiff. "So, everything was a lie?" "No," Jack said quickly. "Not everything. The way I feel about you, that's real. Emma, you showed me something I haven't seen in years. Genuine kindness. You didn't know who I was, and yet, you gave me warmth. Friendship. You changed me." Tears pricked Emma's eyes. She didn't know what to feel. Betrayal? Confusion? But as she looked at Jack, really looked at him, she saw the same man she had sat beside all these weeks. The man who listened, who cared, who had never once treated her differently. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Jack reached for her hands. "Let me help you. Not because I pity you, but because I believe in you." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't want your money." Jack smiled. "I know. But what if I gave you something else? A partnership. A real opportunity." She hesitated. "What do you mean?" Jack's eyes lit up with determination. "You always said you wanted to do something more. What if we started something together? A cafe, a business, something that's yours. No handouts, no pity. Just you and your dreams." Emma searched his face, looking for any trace of insincerity. But all she saw was truth. For the first time in a long time, hope bloomed in her chest. A year later, the grand opening of Emma's Haven was a city-wide success. The cafe was warm, inviting, a place where people from all walks of life could find comfort, just like Jack had found in Emma. Emma stood at the counter, watching as customers filled the space. She caught Jack's eye from across the room, where he sat in his usual seat, reading the newspaper. He winked at her, and she couldn't help but smile. Their journey hadn't been easy. It had taken time, trust, and forgiveness. But in the end, Jack hadn't just changed Emma's life. She had changed his. Because love, kindness, and true connection were worth more than all the money in the world. And it had all started with a simple sandwich in the park. The end.